We're going to pick up where we left off in the last lecture. We're still on PowerPoint 2, Classical Civilizations in Early China. We have just ended the Qin dynasty's rule as Qin Shi Huangdi has died, and a family member is going to rule for a couple of years before there's a rebellion. After that rebellion, however, you're going to see that the entire Qin royal family is going to be killed, and as a result, we don't have that dynasty anymore, so a new dynasty must come to power. The Qin dynasty has lost the mandate of heaven, and now the Han dynasty is going to begin. And the Han dynasty is going to rule China for an extended period of time. And during this period of time, there's going to be a lot of peace and stability and prosperity. So that time of peace in China under the Han dynasty is called the Pax Sinica, which we are going to talk about later in the same PowerPoint. But if you want to go ahead and write it down, it's P-A-X is the first word, and then Sinica, S-I-N-I-C-A. Anytime you see the word Sino or Sino, S-I-N-O, that is referring to China. So like when we talk about Sinification, which is the copying of Chinese culture, we're talking about China. When we talk about the Pax Sinica, we're talking about the Chinese peace that happened during the Han dynasty. Now, the most well-known ruler of the Han dynasty is going to be known as Han Wudi, and he rules from 141 BCE to 87 BCE, and one of his most lasting legacies is going to be the form of centralized government that he establishes. Okay, that is going to be known as, or is going to be built through his enforcement of the civil service exam. Civil service exam. That's essentially going to create a meritocracy in China, and we're going to talk about that later in the same lecture. So during this time, the contemporary empire of the Han Empire would be the Roman Empire. So if you've ever heard of Julius Caesar or Caesar Augustus, you should be thinking that Roman Empire. So around the same time period that we see the Roman Empire reaching its peak, we also see the Han Empire in China reaching its peak. And mostly this is due to King Wudi, or Emperor Wudi. Again, I'm going to repeat the years that he ruled. Han Wudi ruled from 141 to 87 BCE, and this is going to be the apex, or the height, of the Han dynasty. Things were really, really good under Emperor Wudi. Some of the examples of his accomplishments include extending the empire into the east, in taking over Korea, as well as northern Vietnam. You're going to see that China becomes a dominant power in the East, even beyond this period known as the Classical period, as we move into the post-Classical era. So eventually, under the Tang Dynasty, you're going to see that China is known as the Middle Kingdom because it's seen as the center of the world. And they're going to think very highly of themselves and their culture, and it's because they're able to establish a huge empire. They're a tributary state which receives tributes or gifts of money or goods from their colonies. So essentially, China, under Wudi, took over Korea and claimed them as a tributary state that had to pay tribute to China. And they also took over northern Vietnam in the east as well. In the west, the Han dynasty is going to move into Central Asia, and Central Asia is going to be important for economic and agricultural reasons. Agriculturally, it's significant because Wudi is going to move landless farmers to the west to establish agricultural colonies, meaning that you have more food because agriculture deals with farming. So the more farmers you have, the more farms you have in the west and Central Asia, that means more food for your population. The more food you have for your population, the longer people tend to live, which leads to an increased population. Another economic effect of this expansion into the West into Central Asia is the establishment of a trade route known as the Silk Road, which is going to be of huge significance. So I would make sure that when we get to the Silk Road, you write that down. And so as they move further west into Central Asia and they start establishing these trade routes through the Silk Road, the Chinese are going to be particularly interested in their contemporaries, the Roman Empire, which is also incredibly powerful at this time. Although we're not going to really hit on that as much in this curriculum because unfortunately it has been cut from our curriculum for AP World. So speaking of those trade routes, the major Silk Road that you need to familiarize yourself with is the Silk Road. Okay, this is a series of roads that connect China with the Roman Empire. So it's not one physical road that they paved like you think of the Great Wall. This is a metaphorical road. There are many different roads that connect together, but it represents one huge trade route of an exchange of goods and ideas and people from the west to the east and from the east to the west. And one thing that you really need to keep in mind is that this exchange of culture and ideas and people is known as cultural diffusion. Cultural diffusion. I'll type it, down here so you can see it. This is the spread of ideas, people, goods, even diseases from one area to another, often through trade or conquest. Okay, so you're going to see a lot of cultural diffusion occur over the Silk Road. One of the most notable exchanges of culture is going to be the spread of Buddhism. Buddhism did not originate in China. It originated in India. But Buddhism is going to be much more popular in China than it is in India. Well, how did it get from India to China? Through trade and conquest, through cultural diffusion. So there's an example of cultural diffusion in that Buddhism spread along that trade route from South Asia into East Asia. Now, why is it called the Silk Road? Because one of the major goods that the Chinese exported, exporting meaning sold, import means to buy. One of the main goods that the Chinese exported were silk textiles, meaning clothing or garments. So they would basically have these essentially caterpillars that would create silk cocoons, and they were able to harvest those silk cocoons and weave them into clothing that was very lightweight and very high quality, and thus was very expensive, and the very rich would wear them as status symbols. So how you would see people today walking around wearing AirPods, okay, that's a status symbol. It means they got it like that. Okay, that's what it meant when you would wear silk clothing. You also see here other goods that were traded along the way, almonds, camels. Camels are going to be hugely important because as they spread west into Africa, that's going to be important for trade on the Saharan route, the Trans-Saharan trade route. And you're going to see some goods coming from the west into the east. But China is going to be made very, very wealthy off of this trade, especially since they don't tell people how they make silk. They keep the secret of making silk to themselves so that they can hold a monopoly, which means they're the only ones who know how to make it, which means they're the only people you can buy it from, so they can charge what they like. So all this economic prosperity and peace and stability is going to be known as the Pax Sinica, which again, like I said earlier, started under Emperor Wudi. So here we have a period of increased peace, a prosperous economy, and also an increased population. Well, how do we get an increased population? Well, China had expanded its agriculture, and when you have more agricultural production, i.e. more food, that means that people don't starve to death, meaning they live longer, meaning they tend to reach the age of reproduction. And so they're able to have more babies than they could before. More babies equals more people, obviously. Okay, so they also maintain that population in times of famine or drought by storing their grain, their excess grain, for a rainy day or a dry day if you're talking about a drought. And then they would distribute it when times were harder so that people would not face widespread famine, or at least not as much. In terms of technology, under the Han Dynasty, obviously silk is going to be a big one and a very expensive luxury that makes China wealthy. Paper was invented around 100 CE. You also see it invented in Egypt through papyrus reeds, but generally when we think the invention of paper, we think China. They also calculated the 365-day calendar, much like the one that we have today. Gunpowder was invented in China, although it's interesting how it was invented. They weren't looking for a way to make things go boom. Okay, they were looking, once again, for the secret to eternal life. So just like Shi Huangdi thought, hey, mercury might be a good idea in terms of living forever, let's drink a bunch of it. Well, the same idea came when they combined elements like charcoal and whatnot to create gunpowder. Turns out it does the complete opposite of maintaining eternal life. So yeah, they found out that it could make things go boom, and eventually they start adding projectiles so that they can make those projectiles go forward at a much faster rate, but mostly it's going to be used for fun things like fireworks. You don't really see a lot of guns under the Han Dynasty. You're going to see the invention of guns happens much later under the Song Dynasty, where more gunpowder is being transmitted or, culturally diffused to Europe, where it's going to eventually be made into or used for guns in Europe. But mostly in the East, you're going to be seeing it used for fireworks, or under the Mongols, it's going to be very popular for the use of cannons, which we'll talk about when we get to the Mongol Empire. You're also going to see better farming technology evolve, like wheelbarrow or iron drill bits for the creation of technology, iron plows. All of those are going to increase farming production. The more farms you have, the more food you have. The more food you have, the more people you have. So you're seeing, I'm trying to give you all an idea of cause and effect. Causation. This led to this, which then led to the other thing. Okay, that's one of your historical reasoning skills that you're going to have to utilize in this class. You have causation, which is showing cause and effect. Continuity, which is showing what stayed the same, and change, okay, what became different. And then comparison, which is showing similarities and differences, so comparing and contrasting. So those are 3 of the 4. The first one is contextualization, which we've talked about a little bit in terms of context is background information. But whenever you write an essay in AP History, it is always going to be either causation, continuity and change, or comparison. Okay, so it's very important that you start utilizing those skills and becoming familiar with those skills now. Another feature of the Pax Sinica under Han Wudi was his invention of the civil service system. Okay, the civil service system. This is a form of meritocracy. And real quick, I'll type out meritocracy here. Okay, what does merit mean? Okay, your worth or ability. What does ocracy mean? As a ending, it means a form of government. Much like we are a democracy, demo means people, cracy means a form of government, so a democracy is a government by the people or for the people. So a meritocracy is a government that's based on worth or ability. Basically what this means is people with jobs in the government need to be competent. They need to know what the heck they are doing if they're going to run the government. That sounds like a great idea. Okay, so talented and intelligent people need to be in charge of things. Okay, You shouldn't get a job just because of who you know or because your family member has a job in that area and they can pull some strings. Okay? They don't want nepotism where you just put in your friends and family. They want a meritocracy. So how do you determine who is smart and competent enough to run the government? Well, you create a test known as civil service exams. And these are very, very difficult tests based on Confucianist teachings. And they're going to test young men to see if they're qualified for a position in the government. And typically, these government jobs are going to pay very, very well. And so people are going to be willing to study very, very hard in order to pass those exams. Because if you get a job in the government, then you are top notch. You are an important person. So you get money, but you also get clout. So this system is going to evolve into the civil service system that's going to allow anyone who has the ability to attain public office to have a chance to test into those offices. But here's the problem. Education at this time is very expensive. There's not public education where you can just say, oh, from this year to this year, I'm going to go to school, and that's something that is mandated and available to me. No, books are very, very expensive. Okay, they're very, very rare, and they're very, very expensive. So you don't have a large percentage of people who are educated or literate. Typically, in order to learn how to read, you have to be very, very wealthy. So what does this mean in terms of who can get a government job? Well, you're not going to have a lot of peasants who are signing up to take the test. You can't pass a test if you can't read. So instead, this is going to lead to the government overwhelmingly being stocked with wealthy people as opposed to the lower socioeconomic classes. Okay, so, and that means that the people in the government, since they're wealthy, they're going to be looking out for wealthy people, not so much being interested in the poor. So when tax bills come around and it's time to raise taxes, well, who do you think they're going to raise taxes on? They're going to raise taxes on the people that aren't them. Okay, so they're going to raise taxes on the poor, which you don't get a lot of money from taxing the poor, and that's eventually going to lead to rebellions and revolts, which we'll get to in the next slide. So also this civil service exam and its system is going to create a new social class known as the Mandarins, also known as the scholar gentry. I'll type that out. Mandarins or scholar gentry. I'm more familiar with the term scholar gentry, so that's probably the one that I'm going to utilize a lot more in this class. And so they were very, very high up in the social hierarchy. Okay, they're very smart, they're very powerful because they got a job in the government that gives them clout. In addition to establishing a meritocracy in the government, Han Wudi is also going to establish a national university. So that's going to expand education to more people. And both of those things, the meritocracy and the expansion of education, is going to lead to prosperity for the Han Dynasty and for the Chinese people in this empire. But nothing good lasts forever, and so eventually, after about 400 years, the Han Dynasty is going to fall apart. Not every ruler after Wudi was as competent and knowledgeable as he was. Some of the factors that led to the fall of the Han Dynasty included cultural diffusion. Okay, cultural diffusion is the spread of people. And people tend to take things with them, not just physical items, but also ideas and illnesses. So some diseases are going to spread along the Silk Road, the most notable of which included smallpox, measles, and the bubonic plague, which you may have heard of as the Black Plague. Okay, so smallpox, measles, and bubonic plague. Black Plague or the Black Death, you may have heard of in especially the Middle Ages. These diseases are going to kill approximately 1/4 of the Chinese population. That's 1 in 4 people, 25% of China. dies from these diseases spread along the Silk Road. That's cultural diffusion for you. There are positives and there are negatives. Another factor is that is going to lead to the fall of the Han Dynasty includes economic inequality. Y'all remember how in the earlier slide we were talking about taxation? Well, you're going to see that the poor are going to get fed up with the fact that they are losing their land, which at this point in time, land is a form of wealth. They're fed up with losing their land to the wealthier members of society. They're going to be displaced essentially as refugees, and eventually they are going to start a series of revolts, one of the most notable of which is known as the Yellow Turban Rebellion, which led to several million deaths in this rebellion. And so that's going to take the Han Dynasty out in the year 220 CE. Remember that CE stands for Common Era. And China is going to be divided into 3 kingdoms following the Han Dynasty until it is going to be reunited under the Sui Dynasty, S-U-I. I've heard it pronounced different ways, Sui, the dynasty, things like that. The important thing to know about history classes is that you need to know how to spell it. The AP exam is not a verbal exam. Okay, they're not going to make fun of you for how you pronounce mercantilism as long as you can spell it correctly. Okay, so I would focus more on the spelling of words and terms rather than the pronunciation of them. These are one of the videos that I have linked in the page on Schoology. If you'd like to watch it, you can watch the entire thing, but in terms of how far we've gotten in our content, you need to end this video at 6 minutes and 36 seconds. You may have also noticed that here is a video on the Silk Road from John Green. I've also linked that in the Schoology page, and you're welcome to watch that as well.